Dr. Greger certainly gets around, and not just on his treadmill. When he isn't testifying before Congress or lecturing at an international meeting, he's creating highly informative videos on burning health topics and nutrition that we can all freely access. Dr. Greger is the author of several research publications, as well as the bestsellers How Not to Die, and more recently, How Not to Diet. Now, I have to say, when How Not to Diet came out, I thought, what else could he say that he hasn't already said in all of his videos and in his prior book, How Not to Die? And I didn't want to get another book that would sit on my bookshelf. And so I was at the local bookstore, and my husband brought it out and said, hey, here's the new book. And I had to peruse it. And an hour later, I was sitting there, and I just could not pull myself away from the book. So needless to say, I walked out having bought that book. But that's just Dr. Greger. He's that good. So it is a great privilege to introduce Dr. Greger. Please help me welcome him.
Welcome, everyone. How does that sound, the cheap seats in the back here? We good? Seems quiet to me, but if you can hear me, that's fine. Allow me to begin on a personal note. This is a picture of me taken around the time that my grandmother was diagnosed with end-stage heart disease and sent home to die. She already had so many bypass surgeries, she basically run out of plumbing at some point, confined to wheelchair, crushing chest pain. Her life was over at age 65. I heard about this guy, Nathan Pritikin, one of our early lifestyle medicine pioneers, and what happened next is actually detailed in Pritikin's biography. My grandma was one of the death's door people. Frances Greger, my grandma, arrived at one of Pritikin's early sessions in a wheelchair. Mrs. Greger had heart disease, angina, claudication, her condition so bad she could no longer walk without great pain in her chest and legs. Within 3 weeks, though, she was not only out of her wheelchair, she was walking 10 miles a day. This is a picture of my grandma at her grandson's wedding 15 years after doctors had abandoned her to die. She was given a medical death sentence at age 65, but thanks to a healthy diet, was able to enjoy another 31 years on this planet till age 96 to continue to enjoy her 6 grandkids, including me. That's why I went into medicine. Oh, thank you. Years later, when Dr. Dean Ornish published his landmark lifestyle heart trial proving with something called quantitative angiography that indeed heart disease could be reversed, arteries opened up without drugs, without surgery, just a plant-based diet and lifestyle program, I assumed this was going to be the game changer. I mean, my family had seen it with their own eyes, but here it was, in black and white, published in some of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, yet nothing happened. So wait a second, if effectively the cure to our number one killer could get lost down some rabbit hole and ignored, what else might there be in the medical literature that could help my patients, but just didn't have a corporate budget driving its promotion? Well, I made it my life's mission to find out. For those of you unfamiliar with my work, every year I read through every issue of every English language nutrition journal in the world, so busy folks like you don't have to. Very nice. I then compile the most interesting, the most groundbreaking, the most practical findings and new videos and articles I upload every day, nearly every day, to my nonprofit site, nutritionfacts.org. Everything on the website is free, no ads, no corporate sponsorship, strictly non-commercial, not selling anything, just put it up as a public service, as a labor of love, as a tribute to my grandmother. New videos and articles nearly every day, and the latest in evidence-based nutrition. What a concept, right? Okay, so where did Pritikin get his evidence from? Well, a network of missionary hospitals set up throughout sub-Saharan Africa uncovered what may be one of the most important advances in health, according to one of our most preeminent figures in medicine of the last century, Dr. Dennis Burkitt, the fact that many of our major and commonest diseases were universally rare, like heart disease, for example. The African population of Uganda, for instance, coronary artery disease was almost non-existent. You say, wait a second. Our number one killer almost non-existent. What were they eating? Well, they're eating lots of vegetables. and grains and greens and their protein almost entirely from plant sources. And they had the cholesterol levels to prove it, very similar to what one sees in kind of modern day plant eaters. So wait a second, maybe they were just dying early from something else, never lived long enough to get heart disease. No, here's age-matched heart attack rates in Uganda versus St. Louis. 632 autopsies in Uganda, only one myocardial infarction. 632 age and gender matched autopsies in in Missouri, 136 myocardial infarctions, one of the 100 times the rate of our leading killer. In fact, they were so blown away, went back, did another 800 autopsies in Uganda, still just that one small healed infarct, meaning it wasn't even the cause of death. Out of 1,427 patients, less than 1 in 1,000, whereas here, heart disease is an epidemic. Atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, is a disease that begins in childhood by age 10. Nearly all children raised on the standard American diet already have what are called fatty streaks building up inside of their arteries. The first stage of the disease, these streaks then can turn into plaques in our 20s, get worse in our 30s, and then start killing us off. In our heart, it's called a heart attack. In our brain, the same disease process can cause a stroke. So if there is anyone here this afternoon older than age 10, then the question is not whether or not to eat healthy to prevent heart disease. It's whether you want to reverse the heart disease you likely already have, whether you know it or not. But is that even possible? And when researchers took people with heart disease, put them on the kind of plant-based diet followed by populations that do not get epidemic heart disease, their hope was, hey, maybe we could slow the disease down a little bit, maybe even stop it. But instead, something miraculous happened. As soon as people stopped eating artery-clogging diets, their bodies were able to start dissolving some of that plaque away, opening up arteries without drugs, without surgery, suggesting their bodies wanted to be healthy all along, but were just never given the chance. This incredible improvement in the blood flow to the heart muscle itself was after just 3 weeks of plant-based nutrition. Do you know if it's possible to get these front lights off just to not wash out the screen so much? I don't know. This projector is really nice, but I feel bad for this half of the room.
It's kind of a weak one there.
Oh, much better. Nice. Thank you so much. 3 weeks of plant-based nutrition. Well, let me share with you what's been called the best-kept secret in all of medicine. You know, best-kept secret in medicine is that sometimes under the right conditions, the body can actually heal itself. You know, if you whack your shin really hard on a coffee table and get all red hot, painful, swollen, inflamed, but will heal naturally if you just stand back and let your body work its magic. Right? What if you whacked your shin in the same place day after day? In fact, 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You'd never heal. You'd go to your doctor, you'd be like, oh, my shin hurts. They'd be like, no problem. Whip out their pad, write your prescription for painkillers. You're still whacking your shin 3 times a day, still really hurts like heck, but oh, feels so much better. Those pain pills on board. Thank heavens for modern medicine. It's like when our patients take nitroglycerin for crushing chest pain. Tremendous relief, but not doing anything to treat the underlying cause of the disease. Our body wants to come back to health if we let it. But if we keep re-damaging ourselves, our bodies may never heal. It was like smoking. One of the most amazing things I learned in all my medical training was that within about 15 years of stopping smoking, your lung cancer risk approaches that of a lifelong non-smoker. That crazy. I mean, your lungs can clear out all that tar, and eventually it's almost as if you never started smoking at all. And every morning of our smoking life, that healing process started until, wham, first cigarette of the day. Re-injuring our lungs with every puff, just like we can re-injure our arteries with every bite, when all we had to do all along, the miracle cure, is just stand back, get out of the way, stop re-injuring ourselves and let our body's natural healing processes bring us back towards health. The human body is a self-healing machine. Right? Sure, you can choose moderation and hit yourself with a smaller hammer. But why beat yourself up at all? This is nothing new. American Heart Journal, 1977, cases like Mr. F.W. here. Heart disease so bad couldn't even make it to the mailbox. Started eating healthier. A few months later, he was climbing mountains, no pain. Right? You know, there's these new classes of anti-angina drugs on the market now, cost thousands of dollars a year, but hey, at the highest dose, may be able to extend exercise duration as long as 33 and a half seconds. Doesn't look like those choosing the drug route are going to be climbing mountains anytime soon. See, plant-based diets aren't just safer and cheaper, they can work better because you're treating the underlying cause of the disease. Now, normally at this point, I move on to cancer. Killer number 2, talk about the role diet may play in preventing, arresting, or reversing each of our top 15 killers, but I want to take advantage of the time we have together here for lots of Q&A, so I'm just going to skip down through some of these. But in a certain sense, like, what more do we need to know? Only one diet has ever been proven to reverse heart disease in the majority of patients, a plant-based diet, right? So, you know, anytime someone tries to sell you on some new diet, do me a favor. Ask them a simple question. Wait a second. Has this diet been proven to reverse heart disease? You know, number one reason me and all my loved ones will die? The answer is no. I mean, why would you even consider it? If that's all a plant-based diet could do, reverse the number one killer of men and women, isn't that going to be the default diet until proven otherwise? And the fact that it can also be so effective in preventing, arresting, or reversing other leading killers like type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure would seem to make the case for plant-based eating simply overwhelming. Let me touch on those two conditions. Type 2 diabetes, for example, we've known since the 1930s. Take a small group of diabetics, put them on a plant-based diet, check back in 5 years later, quarter them off all their insulin altogether. All right, but plant-based diets tend to be relatively low-calorie diets. Maybe their diabetes just got better because they lost so much weight. I mean, to tease that out, what you'd have to do is put people on a healthy diet, but force them to eat so much food that they don't lose any weight. Then you could see if there's some unique benefits to plant-based eating beyond just all the easy weight loss. Well, we'd have to wait 44 years, but here it is. Subjects were weighed every day, and if they started to lose weight, they're made to eat more food. In fact, so much more food, some of the participants had problems eating it all. They're like, oh, not another salad. Oh. But eventually they adapted. So, no weight loss despite restricting meat, eggs, dairy, and junk. Okay, so with zero weight loss, was there any benefit for their diabetes? Well, insulin needs were cut 60% across the board. Half the diabetics ended off all their insulin altogether. Wow. How many years did that take? No, 16 days. 16 days later. So we're talking diabetics who've had diabetes for as long as 20 years, injecting 20 units of insulin a day, then 13 days later on none. Diabetes for 20 years, then off all insulin in less than 2 weeks. Diabetes for 20 years because no one had told them about a plant-based diet. For decades, they were 13 days away at any time from being free. Here's participant number 15, 32 units of insulin on the control diet, and then 18 days later on none. Lower blood sugars on 32 units less insulin. That's the power of plants. And remember, this was with zero weight loss. His body just started working that much better when provided with the proper fuel. What are the side effects? Oh, how about cholesterol dropping like a rock to under 150 on average, right? So effectively making them heart attack proof in the bargain is like a little bonus, right? So just like asking our patients to make moderate changes in diet will only net us modest benefits in terms of cholesterol reduction, how moderate do you want your diabetes? Right? Everything in moderation is a truer statement than many people realize, right? Asking our diabetics to make moderate changes in diet can leave them with moderate blindness, right? Moderate kidney failure, right? Moderate amputation, maybe just a few toes or something. Moderation in all things is not necessarily a good thing. You know, there's a famous study published in a journal called Cell Metabolism, which purported to show that diets high in meat, eggs, and dairy were harmful to health as smoking, suggesting those in middle age who eat lots of meat, eggs, and dairy 4 times as likely to die from cancer or diabetes. But if you look at the actual study, that's simply not true. Those eating lots of animal protein in middle age didn't have 4 times the risk of dying from diabetes. They had 73 times the risk of dying from diabetes. Now those that chose moderation, only eating a moderate amount of animal protein, they just had 23 times the risk of death from diabetes. The academic institution where the study was done sent out a press release with a memorable opening line, "That chicken wing you're eating could be as deadly as a cigarette." Explaining, look, quadrupling one's risk of dying from cancer? That's comparable to smoking. So what was the reaction in the scientific community to this revelation that diets high in meat, eggs, and dairy could be harmful to health as smoking? Well, one nutrition scientist said it was potentially dangerous to tell people about the study. Why? Because, hey, a smoker might think, why bother quitting smoking? My ham and cheese sandwich is just as bad for me. So let's not tell anyone about this whole meat and dairy. Shh. That reminds me of this famous Philip Morris cigarette ad that tried to downplay the risks by saying, hey, you think secondhand smoke is bad, increasing risk of lung cancer 19%. Well, hey, drinking 1 or 2 glasses of milk every day, maybe 3 times as bad, 62% increased risk of lung cancer. Or doubling your risk frequently cooking with oil, tripling your risk of heart disease by eating non-vegetarian, multiplying your risk 6-fold if you eat lots of meat and dairy. So, they conclude, let's keep some perspective here. The risk from secondhand smoke may be well below that of other everyday activities, so breathe deep. It's like saying, don't worry about getting stabbed, because getting shot, so much worse. Oh, how about neither? Right? 2 risks don't make a right. Of course, you'll note Philip Morris stopped throwing dairy under the bus once they purchased Kraft Foods. Just saying. All right, I'm going to skip down a little bit. Let's do high blood pressure here. 78 million Americans affected, 1 in 3 American adults. And as we get older, our pressures get higher and higher, such that by age 60, most of us have high blood pressure. So wait a second, most of us become hypertensive when we get older. Maybe it's less a disease and just a natural, inevitable consequence of aging. No, we've known since the 1920s that high blood pressure need not occur. They measured blood pressure of 1,000 people living in rural Kenya. Typical Kenyan diet, something like this, lots of vegetables, corn, beans, greens, fruit. Our pressures go up as we age, such that we're hypertensive by the time we hit 60. Their pressures go down. And the lower the better. We now have evidence that even people under 120 over 80 may benefit from blood pressure reduction. So the ideal blood pressure, the no benefit from reducing it further blood pressure, 110 over 70. 110, it's even possible to get pressures down to 110 over 70. It's not just possible, it's normal for those living healthy enough lives. 2 years to this rural Kenyan hospital, 1,800 patients were admitted. How many cases of high blood pressure did they find? 0. Wow, they must have had low rates of heart disease, right? No, they had no rates of heart disease. Not a single case of arteriosclerosis, our number 1 killer, was found. Rural China, same thing. About 110 over 70 their entire lives, 70-year-olds with the same blood pressure as 16-year-olds. Wait a second, African diet, Asian diet, vastly different diets. What they shared in common is that they're plant-based day to day with meat only eaten on special occasions. Now, why do we think it's the plant-based nature of their diets that was so protective? Because in the Western world, according to the American Heart Association, the only group of folks getting it down that low on average are those eating strictly plant-based diets, coming in at an average of 110 over 65. This is the largest study of plant-based eaters to date, The Adventist 2 study looking at 89,000 Californians comparing non-vegetarians to so-called semi-vegetarians or flexitarians. Those who eat meat a few times a month but not every week, compared to those who eat no meat except fish, compared to those who eat no meat, period, compared to those who eat no meat, eggs, or dairy. Now, this was an Adventist study, so even the non-vegetarians didn't actually eat a lot of meat compared to the general population. They tended to exercise, not smoke, eat lots of fruits and vegetables, a very healthy cohort of meat eaters, but still, we see the stepwise drop in high blood pressure rates the more and more plant-based people ate. Same thing with diabetes, same thing with obesity. So, I'm sure you can throw the vast majority of your risk out the window by eating strictly plant-based, but it's not all or nothing. It's not black or white. Any movement we can make along the spectrum towards eating healthier can accrue significant benefits. You can show this experimentally. You take vegetarians, you give them meat, pay them enough to eat it, and their pressures go up. Or you can take people who already eat meat, remove meat from the diet, their pressures go down within 7 days, and that's after the vast majority had to stop their blood pressure medications or reduce their blood pressure medications. They had to. I mean, you can't have normal pressures on multiple drugs. You drop your pressures too low, get dizzy, fall over, hurt yourself, right? Lower pressures on fewer drugs within 7 days. That's the power of plants. So, does the American Heart Association recommend a no-meat diet? No, they recommend this low-meat diet, the so-called DASH diet. So wait a second. When this DASH diet was being created, were they just not aware of this landmark research done by Harvard's Frank Sachs? No, they were aware. The chair of the design committee that came up with the DASH diet was Frank Sachs. See, the DASH diet was created with a number one goal of capturing the blood pressure lowering benefits of a more plant-based diet, yet contain enough animal products to make it palatable to the general population. They didn't think the public could handle the truth. Now you can see what they were thinking, right? Just like drugs never work unless you actually take them, diets never work at all unless you actually eat them. So they're like, look, we can't tell everyone to eat strictly plant-based. How many people are going to do that? So if we soft pedal the message, come up with some kind of compromise diet, well then on a population scale, we'll do more good. Okay. Tell that to the 1,000 American families a day that lose a loved one to high blood pressure. Maybe it's time to start telling the American public the truth, which is that in the United States of America, most deaths are preventable and related to nutrition. According to the Global Burden of Disease Study, the largest study of human risk factors for disease in history, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the number one cause of death in these United States, it's our diet. Leading cause of disability, it's our diet. Now bumping tobacco smoking to number 2, cigarettes only kill about 500,000 Americans every year, whereas our diet kills many more. Right? So wait a second. If most deaths are preventable related to nutrition, leading cause of death and disability, then obviously nutrition. All right, where were we? Santa Claus. I mean, look, you want to keep fit, stay slender, see, make sure to smoke. And eat lots of hot dogs to stay trim, and eat lots of sugar to stay slim and trim. A lot better than that apple there. I mean, sheesh, right? Though apples do connote goodness and freshness, though, reads one internal tobacco industry memo, which brings up many possibilities for youth. They want to make apple-flavored cigarettes for kids. Shameless. For digestion's sake, you smoke. I mean, no curative power is claimed by Philip Morris, but hey, better be safe than sorry, and smoke. Blow in her face and she'll follow you anywhere. No woman ever says no, they're so round, so firm, so fully packed. After all, John Wayne smoked them until he got lung cancer and died. You know, back then, even the paleo folks were smoking. And so were the doctors. Now, this is not to say there wasn't controversy within the medical profession. Sure, you know, some doctors smoked Camels, but others preferred Luckies. So there was a little disagreement. The leader of the U.S. Senate agreed who wouldn't want to give their throat a vacation? Not a single case of throat irritation. How could there be when cigarettes are just as pure as the water you drink? Maybe up in Flint, Michigan. Don't worry, though. If your throat does get a little irritated, your doctor can just write you a prescription for cigarettes. This is in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So when the AMA is on record saying smoking on balance is good for you, not just neutral, but good for you, where could you turn back then if you just wanted the science? What's the new data advanced by science? Well, she was too tired for fun, and then she smoked a Camel. Babe Ruth spoke of proof positive medical science, that is, when he still could speak before he died of throat cancer. If by some miracle, back then there was some kind of smokingfacts.org website that could deliver the science directly, bypassing commercially corruptible institutional filters, you would have become aware of studies like this. This is an Adventist study out of California, published in 1958, showing that non-smokers had at least 90% less lung cancer than smokers. But this wasn't the first. When famed surgeon Michael DeBakey was asked why his studies back in the 30s linking lung cancer and smoking were simply ignored off the face of the earth, he had to remind people what it was like back then. We were a smoking society. It was in the movies, on airplanes, medical meetings where one heavy haze of smoke. Smoking was, in a word, normal. So, back to our thought experiment here. If you're a smoker in the 50s in the know, what do you do? I mean, with access to the science, you realize that the best available balance of evidence suggests your smoking habit not so good for you. So, do you change or do you wait? I mean, if you wait until your doctor tells you between puffs to quit, you could have cancer by then. If you wait until the powers that be officially recognize it, like the Surgeon General did in the subsequent decade, you could be dead by then. It took more than 7,000 studies and the deaths of countless smokers before the first Surgeon General's report against smoking came out. You think maybe after the first 6,000 studies it could give people a little heads up or something? Powerful industry. Right? Maybe we should have stopped smoking after the 700th study like this came out. Right? As a smoker in the 50s, on one hand, you had all of society, the government, the medical profession itself telling you to smoke. And on the other hand, all you had was the science. If you're even aware of studies like this. Well, we can fast forward more than a half century forward. New Adventist study out of California warning Americans about something else they may be putting in their mouths. Of course, it's not just one study. Put all the studies together, and death from all causes put together. Many of our dreaded diseases significantly lower among those eating more plant-based. So, instead of someone going along with America's smoking habits in the 50s, imagine you or someone you know going along with America's eating habits today. What do you do? I mean, with access to the science, you realize the best available balance of evidence suggests your eating habits not so good for you. So, do you change or do you wait? I mean, if you wait until your doctor tells you between bites to change, it could be too late. In fact, even after the Surgeon General's report came out, the AMA went on record officially refusing to endorse it. Why? Couldn't have been because they were just handed a $10 million check from the tobacco industry? Maybe. Okay, so we can see why the AMA was sucking up to the tobacco industry, but why weren't more individual doctors speaking up? There were a few ahead of their time speaking up against industries killing millions, but why not more? Maybe it's because the majority of physicians themselves smoke cigarettes. Just like the majority of physicians today continue to eat foods that are contributing to our epidemics of dietary disease. What was the AMA's rallying cry back then? Everything in moderation. Extensive scientific studies have proven smoking in moderation, oh, that's fine. Sound familiar? You know, the food industry uses those same tobacco industry tactics, twisting the science, misinformation. The same scientists for hire paid to downplay the risk of toxic chemicals and cigarette smoke were the same paid for by the National Confectioners Association to downplay the risks of candy, and the same paid for by the meat industry to downplay the risks of meat. Whereas processed foods and animal foods are wiping out at least 14 million people every year. Those of us in this room, part of this evidence-based nutrition revolution, we're talking about 14 million lives in the balance every year. Maybe plant-based eating should be considered kind of the nutritional equivalent of stopping smoking. But how long do we have to wait before the CDC says don't wait for open heart surgery before starting to eat healthy as well? Until the system changes, we need to take personal responsibility for our own health, for our family's health, for our patients' health. We can't wait until society catches up to the science again, because it's a matter of life and death. You know, when Kim Williams became president of the American College of Cardiology, he was asked in an interview why he himself follows the same diet he recommends to all his patients, strictly plant-based diet. "I don't mind dying," Dr. Williams replied. "I just don't want it to be my own fault." Thank you so much, everyone. Questions? Yes.
Can you talk about, I put patients on a whole food plant-based diet, low or no oil, and
High five.
yeah, thank you.
Here you go. Here you go.
Oftentimes people's LDL will come down, but their triglycerides go up, and so everybody freaks out. So I'm wondering if you can address why that's happening and what kind of time frame you would see those come down.
So there's a lot of people that just cannot handle powdered grains. And so even 100% whole grain wheat, whole wheat bread, for example, is still, actually has very different, very similar glycemic load to white Wonder Bread, because all those little holes almost collapse immediately. Your amylase gets direct access to the starch, instantly absorbed high up in the small intestine. You get a big spike in blood glucose and insulin, and you actually end up undershooting, because your body freaks out so much, because we never evolved to have that kind of spike, and you actually get a hypoglycemic dip, where you actually end up with lower blood sugars than you did before you ate the bread in the first place, and your body freaks out thinking, oh my God, I'm starving, pours fat into the blood in the form of triglycerides. And so you can see that. It doesn't happen with everybody, but the first thing I would do is have people shift over to intact grains. So we want whole oat groats, not even steel cut, which is like oat groats cut in 2 or 3 pieces. Whole oat groats for their oatmeal, rather than instant or rolled oats. Rye berries, quinoa, anything with the intact grain. Because no matter how well you chew, you're still left with bits left over, which blunts the glycemic impact, activates something called the ileal brake, which dials down your appetite and provides the sustenance to your friendly flora, which release these short-chain fatty acids, which improve our metabolic health and also reduce our appetite and improve immunity and decrease inflammation, all these other wonderful things. And so that's the way our body's intended to get calories. And so that's the first thing I would do, is shift them over, say is to deflour their diet by removing powdered grains from their diet, whether whole grain or not. Yes?
Thank you, Dr. Greger. Wonderful talk. I have a question in regards to choline, and I know your approach to eggs, but what does the postmenopausal woman do? As basically, there is no internal supply of choline, so I have to supplement it. So if I supplement it, my approach is if I get it from food as opposed to approach it from the pill.
Okay, so you have been listening to egg industry propaganda, which purports to show an epidemic of choline deficiency, which is just not true. Yes, unfortunately. Yeah, so, but so choline, essential nutrient, but we can get it from cruciferous vegetables and nuts, and we don't need to get it from eggs. And the reason we don't want to get it from eggs, we don't want to get more concentrated source of choline because bad bacteria in our gut take choline, turned into trimethylamine, which is oxidized through our liver into trimethylamine N oxide, which wreaks havoc on our arteries, increases risk of kidney failure, heart failure, on down the risk. Same thing with carnitine, whether in red meat or in carnitine supplements or carnitine like energy drinks, added to energy drinks. We don't want to take concentrated sources of carnitine or choline because we get these bad bugs in our gut making TMAO. Now, you take a vegan, give them a steak, they don't make any TMAO at all because they don't have those bugs. But you give them a steak every single day for a few months, presumably they'd start making it. And so I'm presuming the same thing with people who don't eat eggs. But egg yolks are too concentrated in choline as well as dietary cholesterol for comfort.
Dr. Greger.
Yes.
So, in the last couple of months, I feel my whole food plant-based nutrition IQ has been put in chaos because of discussion on extra virgin olive oil. So, we all know about Dr. Esselstyn and others who think that even extra virgin olive oil will destroy our endothelium. But there's doctors coming out now, like Dr. Danielle Bellardo, who does the Nutrition Rounds podcast, which is excellent, who has said to me personally and on public, she's done a deep dive into the EVOO literature and finds absolutely nothing harmful for cardiovascular health and only feels there are benefits. Now, I'm not talking about weight gain with olive oil. What is it? What do you believe? Because this is driving me crazy.
No need to be driven crazy. You just tell her she's got to see my video on the subject, where I document impaired endothelial function. They gave people organic extra virgin olive oil and saw a decrease in flow-mediated dilation, which is the best indicator of endothelial function and an excellent predictor of cardiovascular events down the road.
So she sent me an article that Dr. David Katz wrote, True Health Initiative,
I know.
where he wrote
I know,
about
Katz
that
is a big
study
fan.
or one like it,
Right.
saying one small study, not
One small
credible.
well, okay. What do you mean
What
one
do we
small
do? That's how he talked about it.
Okay, no. So, I mean, all we can do is make our decisions based on the best available balance of evidence. It doesn't say it's great evidence, but it's the best available balance of evidence. Like, that's the best we have. And so until we have better evidence, that's what we have to go off of. And there's a study showing a decrement in endothelial function, just like when you eat cheesecake or McDonald's like McMuffins, which was the original study that was done with. And so, if it wasn't the number one killer, right, heart disease, then maybe we'd give it a little more slack. But, when we're that concerned, we want to make sure it doesn't impair our artery function. And until we have a better study that shows harmlessness, why don't we stick to foods that actually improve endothelial function? So when you eat nuts, walnuts, high fat, you get as high fat as you want. You eat walnuts, avocados, you actually improve endothelial function. And now it probably wouldn't happen with all of us just because of the sodium content. But, so why not get all the fat you want in whole food sources, get the best of both worlds, an improvement. So even if extra virgin olive oil was neutral, it actually doesn't cause, we got a better study, actually doesn't cause harm. Well, still, why not instead eat something that actually causes improvement in artery function, right? Everything we put in our mouth is an opportunity cost. It's a lost opportunity to put something healthier in our mouth. So by making the pesto with walnuts versus olive oil, we actually get an improvement in artery function. Let's do that. Now, if we have better studies that come out and say extra virgin olive oil works better than walnuts, let's start chugging it on. But until we have that, all we can do is use the best evidence we have. Yes.
You had a really good talk. I have a question though about the reversal of CAD statement.
Yeah.
So going back to that, I just am really unfamiliar with any kind of mechanistic explanation to how the plaques in the foam cells can go away from the artery lining. Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, so it's reverse cholesterol transport. So, I mean, the reason that the plaques build up is an inflammatory response to the infiltration within the subendothelial space of LDL cholesterol. And that causes inflammation. The foam cells get up and gets worse, 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 pops, and we die. Okay, so we can pull that cholesterol. So if we get our LDL cholesterol low enough, so for primary prevention, we're talking about 70, for secondary prevention, 50 or even 30, you get your LDL cholesterol low enough, and we're pulling cholesterol out of arteries instead of putting it in, we can then decrease the inflammation and the plaques shrink. That doesn't happen with calcified plaques. I mean, with the fibrotic calcium that are scarred up, we don't care about those plaques. Those aren't the plaques that are going to kill us, right? The ones that show up on calcium scores, that just shows, oh, well, you obviously have plaques in all stages, even though they're invisible. But yeah, so calcified plaques don't go away, and you're not going to see any change, but we don't care about those. We care about the ones that are inflamed pimples, essentially, when their arteries ready to rupture with the thin caps, and those we can draw right down.
So even like a fresh foam cell that's just been created, even though the LDL has been phagocytosed into the macrophage,
Yeah.
you can still pull that out.
And it's releasing all sorts of the stew of cytokines that we can bring that right down by pulling cholesterol out of the arteries.
Thank you.
And we can do that with drugs, right? I mean, right? Or we can do it with diet. But the nice thing about doing with diet is, of course, you got all the ancillary benefits, it may even work better, since if you look at secondary prevention for a typical statin, so even secondary prevention, we know they have heart disease. We're talking maybe 2 to 3% reduction in absolute risk reduction over 5 years. And we see better results with putting people on a whole food plant-based diet. Even late in the game, that's remarkable. Like, you look at Ornish's patients, they've been eating garbage for 60 years, and then all of a sudden they can actually go. I mean, that late in the game, you can start, meaning their bodies wanted to be healthy every single day. Oh, come on, tomorrow, let's at least. Can we eat some kale tomorrow? Oh, not another. Okay, but then all of a sudden you start eating healthy, and the body's like, okay, let's heal it up, right? We don't want it, right? We don't want to have this festering sore, and so we take away the insult, and it starts festering less. Yes.
Is there any research being done on ALS with whole food plant-based diets?
No. There is an interesting body of research on prevention of ALS, which has to do with a toxin in the aquatic food chain called BMAA, and which is thought to explain why we see clusters around certain areas in Florida and around the blue crab region in Maryland, certain lakes up in New Hampshire. But in terms of once you have it, is there anything we can do to even slow down the progression? And the answer is no for any intervention, and diet's never been tested as far as I know. Although interesting, Ornish. So Dr. Dean Ornish, after conquering our killer number 1, heart disease, moved on to killer number 2, cancer, and showed for the first time the reversal of the progression of early stage prostate cancer with the same diet that reversed heart disease. Now he's got some chutzpah, and it was like, okay, how about let's reverse killer number 4, Alzheimer's, and now we're doing a randomized controlled trial, putting people with Alzheimer's on a plant-based diet. And the trial is underway, and I'll do a video on it when it comes out.
Okay.
I'm skeptical, but we'll see. Oh yeah, amazing, right? I think it's bulldozing the gravestones in the cemetery. It's not going to bring any neurons back, but we'll see. I'm excited.
Well, one of my favorite medical journals is Consumer Report, and it says that you can't trust most nutritional supplements. They don't contain what they say they are supposed to contain. I know from your videos that you recommend omega-3 supplements, and I just wonder if this is a factor in your decision to take them yourself.
Yeah, so, the supplement literature is horrific. Right, so it's so poorly regulated that you don't even know what's on the bottle has anything to do with what's actually in the pills. Forget about toxic contaminants on down the list. And so there's some things you can do. So for example, you can get USP certified, which at least says what's on the label is indeed what's in the pill. Doesn't mean that it's good for you or it doesn't cause harm or that it has any benefit whatsoever, but at least it has what it says it has, which is kind of nice if you're paying money for it. The most important thing for anyone eating a plant-based diet is vitamin B12 supplementation, 2,000 micrograms of cyanocobalamin once a week or 50 micrograms once a day. Some people don't get to live in Sedona and may not get adequate sunshine exposure and may need vitamin D. I'd also encourage people to consider taking 250 milligrams of pollutant-free long-chain omega-3s like DHA. And the only way you do that from these algae or yeast-based supplements. It's all made by one company called Martech, and it's just sold under different brands. So I encourage people to just buy the cheapest brand out there. It's a certain amount of trust that we have to put into these supplement manufacturers, hoping that that by buying from brands that have something to lose, should it come out that doesn't have what it says it has, would perhaps incrementally make you a little more confident in it. But it's
so you just have to try. You can't get enough from walnuts and flax.
Well, maybe. So yeah. So if you eat, so I recommend eating a tablespoon of ground flax seeds every day. That's about 2.1 grams of alpha-linolenic acid, the short chain omega-3s, and you have an enzyme system within you that can elongate those into the fish fats, DHA, EPA. The question is, does your body do it enough for optimal health? And particularly for older men, the answer may be no. We're not talking about heart health. We're talking about cognitive health. And until we know more, I would encourage people to consider it, and I'd watch my videos for all the science and make up your own mind, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Dr. Greger. I have a question on protein and optimal amounts because Naked Food Magazine, there's a little article in here that says between 5 and 10% of total calories versus some of the plant-based nutritionists say even 20%. I don't know if you have an optimal protein intake. Also wanted to ask about soy, tofu in particular, and vital wheat gluten, as in seitan, and what your thoughts are on that.
0.8 grams per healthy kilogram of body weight. All right, that's the Institute of Medicine recommendation for protein. And we have, in fact, in my new book, I talk about a series of studies suggesting that the current average American intake of protein is metabolically harmful because of the branched chain amino acids. And so when you randomize people to what they call a restricted protein intake, but actually just gave people 0.8 grams per healthy kilogram. So they actually gave them the recommended amount of protein versus the kind of standard American diet level of protein, and had significant improvements in metabolic health. And so we really don't want to go over that ideally. And in terms of what sources, so tofu is kind of the white bread of the soy kingdom. Now you take a whole soybean, you remove half the fiber, half the minerals, and you make tofu. Now, soybeans are so incredibly healthy, you can remove half the nutrition, still have a really healthy food, right? But tempeh, for example, you see the individual soybeans in there, that's a whole soy food, so that would be preferable. Miso edamame, the immature green soybeans in a pod, super fun to eat, kids love them. That would be a whole soy food, so those would be preferable rather than a processed food like tofu or soy milk. Although, the benefits attributed to soy, many of those studies are done with even isolated soy protein powder. The studies showing a significant improvement in bone mineral density with soy versus dairy was done in soy milk. It wasn't a whole food at all, but just those soy isoflavones would improve menopausal symptoms, improve bone health, decrease breast cancer risk, kind of has the best of both worlds as kind of a selective estrogen receptor modulator. Oh, and vital wheat gluten. So seitan, obviously not for people with celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but for everybody else, right, it's perfectly fine plant protein. But not as, I mean, but it's an isolate. I mean, that's all you're getting is you're getting protein, and so all the other nutrition in the wheat berry itself is thrown away. You know, so you don't get the fiber. You know, so you know, there's you know, so these kind of foods, what I call, I have a traffic light system of and so that would be yellow light food. So that is that these are plant food. These are foods. Plant foods for which something good has been taken away or something bad has been added. So for there, they took away the fiber, right? They took a perfectly good food, they took away the fiber. Okay, that's better than red light foods, which are ultra processed foods or processed meat, something like that. And so the role I see of yellow light foods, I would encourage people to minimize their consumption, stick with green light foods, whole intact plant foods, from which nothing bad has been added or good taken away. But yellow light foods can be useful to as vehicles to improve your intake of whole plant food. So, for example, almond milk, right? That's a yellow light food. It's a processed food. But if you're not going to eat your oatmeal, green light food, without a little almond milk, well, then put almond milk on it. We want to get that. We want to get that oatmeal in your system. You know, same thing with green tea or something like that. So if you're only going to eat your broccoli, if there's pieces of seitan in there, do it.
Dr.
My question is about mental health. I don't know.
Yes.
Wondering if there's been any connection between vegan diet and mental health or suicidality, any of that stuff.
Yeah, killer number 10 in this country is suicidal depression. And so I have a chapter in How Not to Die talking about all the mental health research. It's actually going to be my 3 books down. So it'll be like 2031 will be my mental health book. I'm getting there. But in hopes that there's more research by then. But there's only one diet ever been proven in a randomized controlled trial to significantly improve mood, and that was the study at the University of Arizona, actually, that removed chicken, fish, eggs, other meat out of people's diets, saw a significant improvement in mood within just 2 weeks. I think it's because of arachidonic acid, this long-chain inflammatory omega-6 fatty acid found predominantly in chicken and eggs, causing neuroinflammation, brain inflammation, but we may be able to clear that inflammation from our brains within as few as 2 weeks by reducing our intake of eggs, chicken, and other meat. So that was really exciting. The only other good, rigorously controlled, trial was with generalized anxiety disorder. They found that those randomized to butternut squash seeds, because of the ratio of tryptophan to protein, improving the serotonin production, did get a significant improvement versus a placebo bar, which just didn't have any butternut squash seeds. And then there's lots of cross-sectional data, you know, like vegetarians, for example, significantly less likely to be depressed and anxious and have all these things. But you don't know if, you know, eating healthy made you feel healthy, or healthy people go on to eat healthier food. You don't eat comfort foods if, you know, you don't need to be comforted. So that's why we need, but we do have interventional studies that do show significant benefits. And of course, in terms of lifestyle medicine more broadly, exercise can help with ADHD, can help with depression, can help with a wide variety of mental conditions. Oh, and I do have some videos coming out on schizophrenia. Schizophrenia and fasting, actually, which are really fascinating and very controversial. All right, what else we got? Yes?
Dr. Greger, back to the essential fatty acids and plant-based versus fish-based.
Yeah.
The studies I've read, there's a very minimal conversion from plant-based omega-3s and 6s into EPA and DHA.
Yep.
And algae are not animal-based, right?
Algae is not animal-based. That is correct. No, but it's preformed in algae. So that's where the fish get it from. These are essential fats. We don't make it. The fish don't make it. We have to take it into our diet. Where do they get it in our diet? From the bottom of the food chain. These golden algae that produce EPA, DHA, build up the food chain. That's how the fish end up getting it. But they also build up mercury and toxic PCBs and dioxins, et cetera. So let's get a pollutant-free source. And algae, but that doesn't have alpha-1-lanolinic, the short chain. That has preformed long-chain omega-3s.
Yeah, because from flax seeds, you know, it's awesome. Your polysaturated and long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids as omega-3s and 6s. It's all fine and dandy. It's just how much is it going to convert to DHA and EPA.
But in terms of for heart health, there's better evidence supporting ALA, the walnut, flax, hemp seed, chia seed, omega-3 in terms of preventing cardiovascular events than the long-chain fish fat. Yes?
Dr. Greger,
Yes.
how would you treat a patient that came to you that was 90 years old, used to eat an American diet, and had chewed tobacco for 40 years?
I would inspect their mouth for precancerous oral lesions and tell them to eat healthy.
You can reverse it.
It's never too late to start eating healthy, start exercising, to stop chewing or smoking tobacco. Absolutely. I mean, it's great that they have the genes to last that long, but it's like someone who's like, I haven't worn a seat belt my whole life, and I haven't died in a car crash yet. Wear your seatbelt, right? Yeah. Yes, yes.
I heard that plant-based can help students or children or teenagers with anorexia. Have you had any studies like that?
Oh, so the question was, what about plant-based diets helping with anorexia? Actually, most of the early data was the reverse, where people with eating disorders had higher rates of eating vegetarian, but later we realized that it was reverse causation, that people with eating disorders became vegetarian as a convenient way of kind of masking their, restricting their food intake. But I know no data suggesting kind of beneficial effect beyond, of course, all the other beneficial effects. But in terms of helping the eating disorder itself, telling people to restrict their foods, I don't see how that would help them with an eating disorder.
Thank you.
What are you seeing with autoimmune diseases, particularly RA and
that is a great question. We see an anti-inflammatory diet is synonymous with a whole food plant-based diet. There's something called the Dietary Inflammatory Index, where there's been thousands of studies that just looked at individual foods, what happens to systemic markers of inflammation like C-reactive protein, et cetera, and you can just give them a score based on the consistency of the data and the amount of drop or rise. And so, trans fats, saturated fats, dietary cholesterol foods are pro-inflammatory, whereas foods high in fiber and flavonoids are significantly anti-inflammatory, particularly turmeric and ginger and all sorts of wonderful things. So you'd think that you'd put people with inflammatory conditions on a plant-based diet and they'd get better, and that's exactly what's happened. We have randomized controlled trials, interventional trials, put people on a plant-based diet, see significant improvements, not only in things like morning stiffness and grip strength and everything, but objective markers of inflammation significantly improved. The most powerful intervention yet we know of for relapse prevention for Crohn's disease. There's new research now done on ulcerative colitis as well. Multiple sclerosis, the most powerful intervention ever described compared to any other medical intervention was Swank's diet, which is a low saturated fat diet, predominantly plant-based. What other good? There's a study done on lupus nephritis showing significant improvement. Now there's a case series talking about lupus in general that was just published. What other good? Even in osteoarthritis, which we think of as kind of a wear and tear disease, is actually an inflammatory component. You stick a needle in, you get these inflammatory meters out, and it's not all wear and tear. We get osteoarthritis in our non-weight bearing joints as well, and an anti-inflammatory diet can help with that as well. And there's specific foods that appear to be helpful, and you can just type in your inflammatory disease du jour into nutritionfacts.org, and you can pull anything up you want.
So I have two B12 questions.
Please.
One is, you suggest that people over 65 should take a little bit more.
A lot more.
Okay, and I was wondering if your blood test levels are in the range, do you need to take more?
Yep. So, the current Institute of Medicine recommendations is that everyone over age 50 take vitamin B12 supplements, period, no matter what you eat. Vitamin B12 supplements, age 50, everybody. And so those eating plant-based diets just have to take that recommendation beforehand. Now, about at age 65, we lose our ability to absorb a B12 such that instead of going from 2,000 micrograms of cyanocobalamin once a week, it goes to 1,000 every day. And you say, well, wait a second. Well, I had the luxury of getting tested. My serum B12 is way up here. Why do I need to take so much? It's because serum B12 is not a good measure of functional B12 status. Now, if you told me your homocysteine is low, your methylmalonic acid is low, and you're only taking 500 a day, and you get retested and it's still good, fine. But there's this nice wealth of data showing that it takes 1,000 a day to keep people over 65 in functional B12 status. So we're not talking about B12, like overt B12 deficiency, where you get like aplastic anemia and you lose vibration sense in your toes and things. We're talking about increase in homocysteine, which is associated with increased stroke risk and some other things. So we really do want to make sure we have optimal B12 status. And unfortunately, at age 65, you just have to go up. But it still costs like $5 a year. Like, it's really cheap stuff.
So the second part was, I heard a lecture with Dr. Kim Williams in this last year, and he made a comment that he believed that there was a select group of men, I think it was like around over 65, who had been smokers, that he said should only take a lesser amount of B12. And I tried to ask our doctor about that, whose whole food plant-based. He didn't know anything. And so do you know anything about that?
I do. Yeah, in fact, I have a video coming out about it. In fact, I have a webinar talking about, 2 B12 webinars coming up, one in February. I forget when the next one coming up is. So there's a study showing that those with high circulating levels of B12 in their blood, smokers who had high levels of circulating B12 in their blood had higher risk of lung cancer. But who has high levels of B12 in their blood? Those who eat a lot of meat. That's where people are getting their B12 from, not from supplements. And so, oh, wow, high meat consumption associated with cancer? That's a shocker. But when you look at interventional trials, because of these homocysteine trials, where they gave people B6, folate, and B12, huge doses, thousands of people over years, what happens? You don't see the increased cancer. So the interventional trials show there's no increased cancer risk taking the kind of B12 intake I specifically recommend.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So I have been vegan for maybe 5-6 years, and the last thing that I can't get rid of is chocolate with it's fat from the cocoa bean.
Yeah.
Is it true that it would be the minimum possible saturated fat is the best thing to do?
Oh, so
or is there a minimum that you should have?
So the Institute of Medicine says the only safe intake of saturated fat is 0. Only safe intake of trans fat, 0. Only safe intake of dietary cholesterol, 0. But the only reason we care about saturated fat intake primarily is heart disease risk. So if your LDL, if you don't have heart disease, if your LDL is under 70 and you're still eating chocolate, then I wouldn't worry about it, right? But if your LDL is stubbornly high, I would cut out all tropical oils, which is coconut oil, palm kernel oil, palm oil, and cocoa butter, because these are the rare cases of saturated plant fats that can raise your cholesterol. But again, if your cholesterol is fine, chocolate away.
It's not, unfortunately.
All right, well, that's good news, because something you can do about it now. And what you can use instead, you say, but I love chocolate. Cocoa powder is defatted cocoa. So there's 2 things you don't like in chocolate, right? Saturated fat and sugar. But cocoa powder is sugar-free and defatted cocoa powder. So you have all the benefits, all those wonderful flavonoids. And so you put cocoa powder in a smoothie, make a chocolate smoothie, make chocolate pudding, do anything you want to do. You can make as chocolatey as you want without hurting your cholesterol.
Thank you. I ran into a researcher who made some comments about APOE 4 and 3 having a relationship with cholesterol metabolism. And I can't seem to get my cholesterol, well, maybe I do eat a lot of chocolate. But
give it a try.
I can't get it under 200, and so have there been any studies yet that have been published around that APOE gene
Yeah,
and
but that's
cholesterol.
that's what the ApoE gene does. Is it regulates cholesterol transport in the brain, and that's one of the reasons why we think. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Ornish thinks that he's going to reverse Alzheimer's, because we have this data showing you can slow the progression of Alzheimer's by controlling cardiovascular risk factors. You can correlate the amount of narrowing within the cerebral arteries that go to the memory centers, et cetera, with the onset of Alzheimer's and cognitive decline, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we got to get your cholesterol down. If you are eating plant-based, you've already got rid of the 3 things that increase your cholesterol: trans fats, most saturated fats, and dietary cholesterol. But some people, so if you just do that, then the mean cholesterol, total cholesterol, 147. So the average person eating plant-based diet, perfect cholesterol. Just like average, 110/60, perfect high blood pressure. But it's a bell curve, right? And those standard deviations about 30 on either side. So, if you happen to be even eating perfect, you happen to be on the high side, then you just have to add foods to your diet that actively pull cholesterol from the body, and that's the reason why Dr. Jenkins at the University of Toronto developed a portfolio diet. We said, okay, there's these different plant foods that decrease cholesterol through different mechanisms, so let's have a portfolio of cholesterol-reducing foods, like nuts every day, like slimy foods like okra, oatmeal, eggplant, the soluble fiber foods, pulls cholesterol out of your body on through, and to lower your cholesterol even further. If that doesn't work, then you're looking for secondary causes of hypercholesterolemia, like hypothyroidism, things like that, to really find out why your blood isn't reflected. Yes?
In a lipid profile, is there a risk ranking for things like LDL, cholesterol, triglycerides?
So LDL is the most important. And that is not what the industry wants to hear, because there's a cheap test, not making anybody any money. So that's why they want people to do all these really fancy lipid panels. But we have yet to really come on something that's a better kind of predictive value than really kind of simple measures like that. Although, if you're kind of intermediate ranges, then adding something like calcium scoring and things can knock you on either side. But when we're talking about safe, simple, side effect-free solutions like eating healthy with no downsides, then we don't have to, then this algorithm, we don't want to put people on statins yet because, there's a small chance of losing. Okay, but when it's all good, when it's just benefits, well then, the bar for asking people to eat healthy is really low. But there's I have some videos coming out on Lp(a), for example, where you can have people with gorgeous LDL having multiple strokes and all sorts of bad things happen because of Lp(a), which is mostly, but not entirely, genetically determined. And there are actually, so if you look at a textbook, it says diet doesn't do anything. And you know why? Because they never tried a plant-based diet before. Right? You add some fruits and vegetables, nothing happens, right? But put people on a plant-based diet, you can drop it. There's specific foods that can drop it, and I've got videos coming up. Stay tuned.
What's your thinking on LDL particle number?
Yeah, so egg industry talking point, which is that eggs, egg yolks increase LDL, but it's the light, fluffy LDL, the big, not those small, dense LDL. And it's true, but they're all bad. And so I have a video where I go through and it shows that, so the small dense LDL increases your risk this much, I forget the exact numbers, whereas the light fluffy LDL only increases your risk, but it all increases your risk of heart disease. And so fractionating down really doesn't, I think, give us much additional information. Unless it helps you motivate a patient. If showing them a lab value is going, something printed out, or like a little digital thing with, there's all sorts of new little, you can take blood from people with a finger stick now. You can do lipid panels. And you show them and you say, look, people in your situation with this kind of cholesterol are going to suffer X, Y, Z. Here's the predictable consequences of your actions. Unless you eat an apple, then you know, I don't care what test in the world is going to do it, right? In fact, that's one of the benefits of this calcium scoring, right? We're giving people, you know, we're exposing people to ionizing radiation, but if they then go to eat healthier because of it, well, then you could argue that the benefits outweigh the risks. But the benefit is mostly in the motivation. Is can we, if we can show somebody something that they put up on the fridge next to the ultrasound of their grandkids, and then they have, here's their arteries, and if that's going to get them choosing oatmeal every morning instead of bacon and eggs, go for it. And so if additional data helps motivate people, then I'm open to it. But, you know, USPSTF, the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, says that you don't need to do anything beyond total and LDL cholesterol.
Dr. Greger, thank you so much. You're so charismatic. I feel that the world would be a far better place and everyone would be vegan or plant-based if you had as much exposure as the current resident of the White House. In any event, please, please could you...
I don't know, that's kind of a low bar. Let me just say, I don't know. You're better than Trump. Right, okay. Just saying.
Please could you speak to the science, if it's available, behind some key components of, for example, the ancient Ayurvedic diet, so polished white basmati rice, homemade yogurt or home-churned buttermilk, which is, of course, from cow's milk, clarified butter or ghee.
Yeah, so bad idea. So, for example, the reason we think, you would think that in India, where about 40% of the population, in South Asia, the subcontinent of India, you'd think 40% of the population is vegetarian. They have really low rates of heart disease, and they don't. And it's because they're not just sucking down cholesterol, but oxidized cholesterol. When you boil butter, when you clarify butter, you get the formation of this 27-oxycholesterol, and I have videos about this, which can be particularly damaging to the arteries. And so they're just eating like the worst possible animal product, increasing their risk of cardiovascular disease. The Ayurvedic tradition, I mean, you know, they were intentionally putting heavy metals, mercury and lead, into their therapeutics to potentiate the effects. I mean, you know, that's why we have science. We can put things to the test. And so, you know, there's only so much ancient wisdom can get us. I mean, what it can do is it can inspire us to put it to the test. But beyond relying on that and beyond, you know, ooh, maybe we should test this root because everyone seems to, that's like the root they prescribe for diabetes. Let's test the root. And indeed, that's how we found the amazing benefits of amla, dried, you know, Indian gooseberries and all sorts of things. But until we put it to test, we really don't know. And eating white rice is still not as good as brown, and yeah. And it would be better if they were not eating clarified butter.
Hi, thank you for that great presentation. I have a question kind of switching from outpatient to inpatient. The tube feeds that we give our patients. I know it's far away, but do you know if there's change happening when it comes to enteral feeding? Like most of the ingredients are animal-based.
Oh, it's the worst. Have you looked at the ingredients? I mean, it's like, you know, it's like whey and corn syrup, like, you know, and a multivitamin.
It's supposed to be healthy and help them heal.
And like tube feedings, God, you could give people like as healthy as you want. They don't taste anything. They got no, you have perfect compliance. How much kale can you stuff down them? Right? I mean, you think, right? Yeah, no, but it's really, but of course, you know, I mean, you know, fresh stuff goes bad. Right, no, but if you have a Vitamix, you can make the healthiest possible tube feeds on the planet, but it's just not commercially viable. There are some companies working on better alternatives. They're all pretty bad. To have a shelf-stable product, I mean, it's just really hard to do. And the regulatory barriers are really tough for new companies to break into the field. And so really it's you know, prevention, not getting in the first place, and many of the reasons we've tube feed patients, if you look at the data, you don't see benefit. I mean, we have this we have this sense that that lack of food is an emergency, and that we want to feed. We don't want our hospital patients starving. But if you actually look at the data, particularly the ICU data, where they're feeding people versus not feeding people, some studies show higher infection rates and things with tube feedings. Versus the natural anorexia that comes with major illness. Maybe that's our body telling us right now we really don't need to be stuffed with thousands of calories. And indeed, like with cancer cachexia, no matter how many calories you stuff into somebody, they still lose weight. It's not that they're not getting enough calories. It's this catabolic process. Obviously there's certain conditions where we really do need to feed people, but hopefully for as little as possible, so we can get them eating healthier foods. But I absolutely sympathize. There really aren't any good options on the market that I know of.